Welcome to On the Other Hand, and welcome to any new viewers. Most channels I subscribe to because I am genuinely interested in their content, and even if I make a response video, it's because I respect and like the content and want to see it at its very best. A few select channels I subscribe to because I know they'll put out questionable material, and that's low-hanging fruit for me.
I know, I'm disgusting, but one learns to love it.
Innuendo Studios happens to be one of those channels, and a questionable video came recently entitled, The Alt-Right Playbook, I Hate Mondays. Now I was quite proud of the first strawman argument I pointed out from Innuendo Studios, but it pales in comparison to this one. It is a longer clip, but I'll just roll it for you and let you see for yourselves.
Say, for the sake of argument, it's the start of another week at the office, and you and your coworkers are milling around the break room putting off getting to work because, until you sit down at your desk, the week hasn't actually started. Mostly you're chatting about what you all got up to over the weekend and how you can't wait for the next season of Killing Eve, but then the new guy, who doesn't know any better, starts talking about the healthcare system and what he thinks is wrong with it. The rest of you all know what this means. If talk turns political, you have to hear the opinions of the guy from payroll. Guy from payroll takes issue with the new guy's comments about how patients in many other countries pay less for better outcomes. Guy from payroll thinks overhauling the healthcare system would be a long and difficult process to create a system where he would pay higher taxes and have fewer options. And all for what? He doubts socialized medicine, if it even worked, would be worth the trade-offs, and even lets slip the phrase, "Do Democrats think they can live forever?" To cut the tension, someone starts talking about their kids who've just started at a new school. But talking about school leads to talking about safety drills, and talking about safety drills leads to talking about school shootings, and now the new guy's on gun reform. And he speaks passionately about how easily monsters can get their hands on assault rifles. But payroll counters that even if you get rid of every gun in the country, criminals will just import them. A bad person can always find a way to do bad things, and why should he, as a responsible gun owner, be punished for the crimes of a monster? There is, again, an uncomfortable silence. Guy from payroll fiddles with his tie. He doesn't like this any more than you, he just can't help himself. Someone tries to change the subject, but by now, new guy is looking to win an argument, so he steers you straight to Roe v. Wade. And payroll is off and running, talking about how beautiful childhood is and how wonderful it is to be a parent, and how it's tragic for any life to be cut short before it begins, and how evil it is to have state-sanctioned, but new guy just can't keep his mouth shut. He says, if you wanted fewer abortions, you would promote comprehensive sex education and easy access to contraceptives, because that's all that has ever reliably lowered abortion rates in any country. All making it a crime does is determine whether the abortion happens in a doctor's office or a motel room. It is deathly silent. People shuffle in place. Finally, without making eye contact, the guy from payroll just says, "Ugh, I hate Mondays." Everybody shuffles off to their cubicles, scowling more at the new guy than at the guy from payroll, and another week officially begins. What I want you to understand today is that the conservative thinks about people dying of preventable illnesses, school shootings, and back alley abortions the way you think about Mondays. The conservative mindset tends to sort things into binaries with no room for scale. Mass shootings either happen or they don't. You can talk about how much safer countries with robust gun control are, and they'll just say, here's a shooting that happened in England. Here's a shooting that happened in Australia. Gun control didn't stop them. You can't regulate evil. The mentality here is that if you can't stop every shooting, you shouldn't bother stopping any. If you can't save every life, there's no point improving healthcare. Nothing short of literally defeating death will be good enough. It is a wholesale rejection of thinking in terms of systems. Notice how payroll phrases his argument, a bad person can always find a way to do bad things. Person. Singular. If a criminal can still get a gun, they extrapolate that every criminal can get a gun, in the same way that if a poor person can get a job, every poor person can get a job. Which, no!
So much to unpack. I know Innuendo Studios like setting up specific hypothetical situations to present ideas, but this one is a doozy. The arguments presented in this hypothetical aren't that far off from realistic arguments on the subjects, but it's interesting to note how the people are framed. Like how the awkward pauses come after the guy from payroll stops talking, suggesting his points fall flat. And the new progressive guy gets framed as passionate and has the last word in the argument, suggesting there isn't a good rebuttal. Once we get past the 2.5-minute for the sake of the argument situation, we are treated with the statement that the conservative mindset tends to sort things into binaries with no room for scale, while at the same time, Innuendo Studios groups conservatives into the alt-right, if the title of the video is anything to go on, and leaves no room for scale on how conservatives and the alt-right might overlap or differ. And it's interesting that the arguments presented in the hypothetical seem to be more accurate than the arguments Innuendo Studios presents in more detail afterwards. Anyway, Innuendo Studios rightly rejects extrapolating that because one poor person can get a job, every poor person can get a job, but somehow finds it okay to extrapolate that because conservatives right believe you can't stop every shooting, that somehow they believe you can't stop any shootings. Anyway, it was a pretty biased video to say the least, and here I'd like to bring in a video done by CGP Grey on thought germs that encapsulates what I object to in this Innuendo Studios video, as well as in politics in general.
When opposing groups get big, they don't really argue with each other, they mostly argue with themselves about how angry the other group makes them. We can actually graph fights on the internet to see this in action. Each becomes its own quasi-isolated internet sharing thoughts about the other. You see where this is going, right? Each group breeds thought germs about the other, and as before, the most enraging, but not necessarily the most accurate, spread the fastest. The group almost can't help but construct a totem of the other so enraging they'll talk about it all the time, which, now that you know how thought germs grow, is exactly what makes the totem always perfectly maddening.
This is one of my favorites that Grey does, and coincidentally, this is why I like to do response videos. I want to be someone who directly engages with opposing ideas, because I would rather have less sensational and honest discussions over hyperbolic partisan ones. For a real-world example of sensational partisans, here's a clip from a channel called Pod Save America, where they are covering President Trump's recent rally at Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Trump made no mention of the recession or the double-digit unemployment rate, no mention of the more than 120,000 Americans who've died from COVID-19, no mention of George Floyd's murder or the protests against systemic racism. The president did refer to the pandemic as the Kung flu virus and said the following about testing.
Here's the bad part. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
So the Trump campaign has later said that he was joking, but the Biden campaign has told reporters that they'll be focusing on these comments all week. Tommy, how damning do you think these comments were?
I mean, look, I think it's pretty damning. I mean, you can't, like, he was not kidding. He wasn't kidding. They're trying to pretend he was kidding. He was not.
So these pundits, whose job it is to report on political news, took a very specific clip from a political rival and adamantly stated there's no way it could have been a joke. If one only listened to Pod Save America and trusted the enraging totem they described, you would miss the complete picture as can be seen in the clip in context.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test. We got tests that people don't know what's going on. We got tests. We got another one over here. The young man's 10 years old. He's got the sniffles. He'll recover in about 15 minutes. That's a case. Add up to it. That's a case. That's a case.
So you are free to disagree with President Trump's policy or personality, but I would dare say intentionally misreading that quote as completely serious is hyperbolic at best and literally fake news at worst. You are also free to disagree with conservative ideas or positions, but it would be nice to not accuse people of treating school shootings just like they would a regular Monday at work. I just think we should sanitize our brains and fight a pandemic of thought germs in a similar way to how we sanitize our hands to fight a literal virus. As always, thanks, hope you enjoyed, and if you did, consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you'll get notified for new uploads.